Okay, good to see everyone online. Good to see everyone in person. Thank you so much to Susan and Jacob Tredakowitz for sponsoring the shir today and sponsoring the lunch in honor of their new granddaughter, Mazal Tov. May she go to Torah, Chuppah, Masim Tovim. So exciting. And Gabby has been what? Yes, Moria. That's right, Moria. That's right. Moria is a beautiful name, as in Hara Moria. And so that is a beautiful name. And she should make a name for herself in a beautiful way and bring joy and achas to her family. So it's meaningful to celebrate a simcha like a new baby, new member of the community, particularly on this difficult day of Yom HaZikaron. Yom HaZikaron, it's a very, very important day in Eretz Yisrael. Here we honor the memory of all those who made the ultimate sacrifice fighting for Am Yisrael to give us Medinat Yisrael. And so our learning today is a schus for their memory. And we should be inspired by their courage, by their Mesirat Nefesh. And Yom HaZikaron is even more painful, very, very painful in a different way. We're experiencing it in a different way this year with everything that's happened in the last 7 months. So that should be their sacrifice and their Mesirat Nefesh to Am Yisrael and everything they gave over the course of the decades should be a schut for them, for Am Yisrael, and should be an inspiration for us to do everything we can to give of ourselves. Hopefully we shouldn't have to sacrifice, but to give of ourselves for a bright future for Am Yisrael. Okay, so let's get started with the Parsha. Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parshat Emor. And in Parshat Emor, so the first part of the Parsha discusses the Kohanim. Then you have a whole section about the holidays. And then there's actually a narrative, there's a story towards the end of Parshat Emor. So that's where we'll start off, page 690. The last word of the page is Vayetze, and it's in the 7th aliyah of Parshat Emor, page 690, 692. Page 690, 692. So in the Parsha of Emor, we have one of the two stories in the entirety of the book of Vayikra. One narrative occurs in Parshat Shmini with Nadav and Avihu going into Holy of Holies and being killed in the Holy of Holies. And here we have in Parshat Emor, it says we have the second story in Vayikra. Okay, so there are two narratives in the book of Vayikra. One of them is in Parshat Shmini with Nadav and Avihu, and the second one is here in Parshat Emor, where it tells us in the 7th aliyah, Vayetze ben Isha Yisraelit, v'hu ben Ish Mitzri. A man went out, he was the son of a Jewish woman, and a Mitzri, an Egyptian man, so he had an Egyptian father and a Jewish mother, and he went out Petoch b'nei Israel, Vayinatzu b'machaneh, and he gets into a fight with a ben ha-Yisraelit v'ish ha-Yisraeli, and he gets into a fight with an Israelite man. Okay, so the Torah relates that a man, it's a Jew with a Jewish mother and an Egyptian father, gets involved in an altercation with another Jew. And during the fight, the pasuk says, "Vayikov ben Isha Yisraelit et Hashem." He blasphemes the name of God. Vayikalel, and he curses God. Vayaviu atol Moshe, and they arrest him and they bring him to Moshe. V'shem imo Shlomit badivri lematei Dan. And the name of this individual's mother was Shlomit, and she was from the tribe of Dan. And they put him into jail. They put him under guard, lefrosh, lehem al pi Hashem, because Moshe and the other leaders were not sure exactly what to do and how to, punish, what the consequences should be for what this individual did. Who is this blasphemer? What's the source of his anger? So Rashi says over here, Ben Ish Mitzri, around 8 lines down, Hu HaMitzri Shaharag Moshe. That Rashi says that this individual, the blasphemer, who ends up being executed for his serious crime of blaspheming the name of God, the Mekalel. So Rashi says that he was the son of that Egyptian who was killed by Moshe towards the beginning of the book of Shemot. If you remember, when Moshe was growing up, there were 3 stories that occur in his early years. The first one is that an Egyptian is beating upon a Jew. Moshe springs into action and he saves the Jew by killing the Egyptian. The second day, there are 2 Jews that are fighting, and Moshe again intervenes and tries to improve, tries to help the situation and stop the fight. And the third story that occurs is when Moshe flees Egypt because the Egyptian authorities are onto him. So then these shepherds, these Midianite shepherds, are bullying the women, and Moshe again gets involved and tries to, and he does, save the women from the bullying of the shepherds. But the first story that occurs in Moshe's early years is when an Egyptian was beating upon a Jew. And Rashi tells us over here that there's a linkage between that story that the Egyptian is beating upon the Jew and this story here, where you have a man who's Jewish because his mother is Jewish, but his father is an Egyptian. That father, that Egyptian, was the one who was beating upon the Jew. And that was the one who Moshe killed, according to Chazal, by utilizing the Shem HaMeforash. He utilized the name of God. So either Moshe killed the Egyptian by actually chanting the name of Hashem, or perhaps it's less literal that Moshe was protecting his people on behalf of Hashem, for the sake of Hashem. And so this blasphemer is the son of that Egyptian. The Klei Yakar, 16th century, early 17th century, from Prague, suggests a beautiful idea. He says, Al kain kol hayamim haya megadev betoch libo, that all his days there was a resentment that he had against Moshe and God, and the community didn't realize it. And his resentment was that his father was killed. His father was murdered in his mind, perhaps. At some point he learned of the story that his father was killed by Moshe. And so according to the Klei Yakar, he harbored a deep resentment against God and against Moshe for a long time. A person who has complaints or is cursing God, the heavens, in private, nifra mimenu begoli, is going to be punished, and the consequences are going to be in public. Al kain siviv Hashem, so Hashem arranged matters. She yetze me'olo b'toch b'nei Israel, kedei shetigla ra'ato bakal. In other words, this young man cursed God in his heart, sought private, subtle ways, perhaps, to undermine the Jews. He was filled with this hidden anger. And so Hashem didn't want his underhanded schemes to remain private for that much longer. And that's why, God arranged it in his providence for this fight to happen, for him to get into this argument, and then for him to publicly do what really privately he had been thinking all along. Privately, he was very upset about a number of things, including and maybe primarily about his father, what happened to his father. And so now he gets into dispute. In the heat of the moment, the man curses God publicly, and the truth finally comes out. According to the Klei Yakar, what the story is teaching us really is that we don't know the ways of Hashem, but when there's emes, when there's truth, even though sometimes it takes a while, but the truth will ultimately prevail. We live in a world today where there's kind of a battle over what the truth is, and what is truth and what is lies, and the distortion that's going on in the world and in the media and among many. And so what the Klei Yakar is saying is that really there was a certain truth here, that this guy was filled with an anger, and he wanted to keep it secret. But ultimately, the truth emerges, and the truth will prevail. Winston Churchill once said that the truth is incontrovertible. Panic may resent it, ignorance may deride it, malice may distort it, But there it is. You have truth. The word that's used to introduce the story is vayetze, vayetze. And this individual has kind of mixed lineage. Now, either this could be really a statement or a commentary on the problem of assimilation and intermarriage, because his parents, right, there was an Egyptian and a Jew. According to Rashi, that it wasn't intermarriage. It was actually, according to Rashi, what happened, that the Egyptian was pummeling the Jew because he desired the Jew's wife, Shlomit. And that's what happened. That's when the Egyptian was with the Jew, with Shlomit, and this is the child from that union. But really, according to Rashi, that this was this was a rape or some kind of assault of the Jewish woman Shlomit. So different ways exactly of understanding what happened, but this individual in our story, there's a kind of there's a racial component here, because his father is Egyptian and his mother is a Jew. And it's Vayetze. If we go back again to the story in the beginning of Shemot with Moshe, also there's Vayetze. It says Vayetze Moshe. Let's take a look in Sefer Shemot. Again, referring to the same story that we just mentioned. It says, Vahi bayamim hahem, on page 298, Vayigdal Moshe vayetze elachav. He goes out to his brethren. Vayar b'sivlotam, and he sees their suffering. Vayar ish mitzri make ish ivri me'achav, and he sees the Egyptian beating upon the Jew. So Moshe is similar. Number one, there's a vayetze by Moshe. There's a vayetze over here. Number two, Moshe also, yes, both of his parents were Jewish, but he was raised in the Egyptian palace. He was raised by Egyptian parents. So he kind of also had this interesting, different kind of situation. And here in our story, it's a little bit different, but here he had a mixture. It was an Egyptian father and a Jewish mother. With regards to Moshe, it says Vayetze Elachav, that Moshe Rabbeinu goes out and he does goodness for his nation, right? And he saves the Jews and he becomes a Jewish leader. Vayetze in our parsha, it said what happens? He goes out and he curses. He brings down the people. And so what you have here is a linkage between the two stories, and it's different kinds of vayetze. Vayetze is how do we go out into the world? And Moshe and this Mekalel, both in different times, go out into the world, and they have similar upbringings in a certain sense. But every single Jew is faced with the choice of how am I going to go out, and what am I going to do, and who do I identify with? And Moshe identifies with his brethren, and he decides to, of course, do everything he does for the Jewish people. While this blasphemer, he goes out, takes his complicated lineage, his complicated past, and he ends up bringing people down. He rejects Hashem, and he becomes a negative force in the world. So that's another message, I think, of this section here is how do we vayetze into the world? Every single person has a choice to make. Moshe does it in one way, and of course we should follow Moshe, and this blasphemer, this Mekalel, does it in the other way. What was he really upset about, this blasphemer? Okay, so one possibility that we suggested is that he was upset about the fact of what happened to his father. But Rashi gives a couple other interpretations. If you look on page 692 at the top, it says Mehechan Yatza. So it says Vayetze. Where did he leave from? What kind of caused him to get so upset and to end up cursing God and to get into this fight? What were they fighting about? So Rashi says, Rab Levi Omer Me'olamo Yatza, that he left his world. He left the world to come. In other words, through this story, he ended up not only getting killed in this world, but he ended up losing his portion in the next world. However, Rabbi Brachia Omer Mi Parsha Shalamala Yatza. This section is connected to the previous portion in the Chumash. We've been connecting it to the book of Shemot, Vayetze, Vayetze, and Rashi does connect it to that story. But here Rashi says that maybe there's a connection between this section and the immediately previous section, which speaks about the lechem hapanim. It speaks about the showbread in the Beis Hamikdash. The previous two sections speaks about lighting the menorah and bringing the bread in the Beis Hamikdash. And so Rashi says, what did this man do? Because what does it say? Look at Rashi. We know about the bread, that on Shabbos they would place these loaves of bread onto the table, and the Kohanim ate the 12 loaves that had been on the table since the previous Shabbat. And so, derech hamelech lechol pat chama b'chol yom. So this individual said the king should have fresh bread every single day. Shem patzo nenet shal tisha yamim, should he eat bread that's over a week old? Because it's baked on Friday, and then it's placed on Shabbos onto the table, and then the Kohanim only eat it the following week. And that's how it goes. The bread is kind of on the table for a whole week, and then they bake a new set of 12 loaves every single week, but they don't bake it fresh on Friday and eat it that Shabbat. They bake it Friday, and then they take off the bread that was baked the previous week. And then they put the bread that was baked Friday, they put it on Shabbat to be eaten the following week. So he was very upset about this, because he said that doesn't make sense that a king should eat stale bread that was sitting on the table for 8 days. All the more so when it comes to the King of Kings, he shouldn't be served stale bread. And so that's why he was upset. What's going on here? So perhaps it wasn't just the stale bread. What does this represent? Now we know that there was a miracle in the Beis Hamikdash, that the bread remained fresh. But maybe this is not just an issue about bread. Maybe it's an issue about Torah and mitzvos. That this individual who is blaspheming Judaism, he's blaspheming God. He's saying that the bread is stale, and that the mitzvot also were given 3,300 years ago. How do they relate to me? They don't speak to me. They're not relevant anymore. According to Rav Soloveitchik, this is what Korach was complaining about, because according to Rashi says that the rebellion of Korach, which appears later in Sefer Bamidbar, that appears right after the portion of Tzitzit. So Rashi again makes a connection between the two, just like over here where he makes a connection between the blasphemer and the lechem hapanim in the Beis Hamikdash. So too Rashi makes a connection between the rebellion of Korach and the previous section of Tzitzit. And Rashi says that Korach came to Moshe and said that, let's say you have a whole garment made of tchelet, made of this special blue dyed wool. So do you also need a string of a tchelet? And Korach explained this question. He said, if you have just a regular wool garment, or a cotton garment, all you need is a couple strings of wool and one string of tchelet. Okay, many don't wear tchelet nowadays because we don't know exactly what it is. So many think that we have discovered what it is, but the one blue string was always traditionally part of the mitzvah of tzitzit. So Korach said, if you have a whole regular wool garment, all you need is one blue string. Let's say the whole garment is blue. Do you need to have a blue string? Doesn't make sense. Why should you have to have a blue string? Similarly, Korach said, if you have an empty house, all you need is one piece of parchment on the doorpost to serve as the mezuzah. But what about if you have a house that's filled with svarim, that's filled with sifrei Torah? So do you also need a mezuzah? And Moshe said, yes. You need a mezuzah on every single house, even if the house is filled with svarim. And you need to have that string of tchelet. You need to have the 8 strings on each corner, even if you have the garment full of tchelet. One explanation is that what's going on is that Korach is saying that all of Bnei Israel are holy. The whole garment is tchelet. We're all holy. Why do we need the additional leader? Why do we need the additional string? And Moshe is saying, yes, all Jews are holy, but still you need to have the leader. You need to have the prophet. You need to have somebody to give them guidance. But the way Rav Soloveitchik understands the story is that Korach was saying that this was the common sense rebellion. And this essay is written in one of Rav Soloveitchik, one of the books of the teachings and essays of Rav Soloveitchik. And the title of the section is The Common Sense Rebellion of Korach. Korach was saying everything needs to make sense. It doesn't speak to me, Rabbi. It doesn't inspire me. So why should I have to hear shofar on Rosh Hashanah? Let me watch some TED videos or whatever it is to inspire me to do tshuva. Why do I need to hear the shofar? So Korach was saying that everything needs to make sense, and if something doesn't make sense, I shouldn't have to do it. So if you have a garment that's wool and all you need is one string, so logically, if the whole garment is a blue dyed wool, you shouldn't need the additional string. However, but what Moshe is responding, according to Rav Soloveitchik, is that not everything is. We don't not all the reasons are evident to us. Because everything has a reason and a logic, but not all the reasons are evident to us, and we don't always understand. And so, even if the mitzvah is not necessarily logical, that's called a chok. We have to follow it, and even if it's not speaking to us, we have to observe it. And so that's what Korach was arguing about, and perhaps that's what's going on here in Rashi. That with this blasphemer, okay, he's blaspheming. What does it have to do with anything? So the first idea we suggested was that this connects to the story in Shemot with Moshe Rabbeinu, which is really interesting. Vayetze, and number one, the truth ultimately emerges that he harbored this resentment his whole life, and he was maybe trying to undermine the Jews, and the truth wins out. Number two is Vayetze, that he chose Vayetze, and Moshe chose a different kind of Vayetze. But number three, Rashi says, what were they arguing about? They were arguing about, or what was he upset about? He was angry about the lechem aponim. Why was he angry about the bread? Thankfully, I think the food is fresh here at Beth Jacob. We put out food for fresh bread and fresh food. But that is annoying when things are put out that's not fresh. But it would annoy him so much. But maybe what's going on here is not just the fresh bread, but that he thinks that all the mitzvos, it was given 3,300 years ago. So it's not proper to worship Hashem and to be religious in a way with bread from 8 days ago. It's not proper to be religious with mitzvot that were given 3,300 years ago. We were discussing this at the table, Mom, right? Last night, we were discussing this at the table in terms of the written law and the oral law and things being passed on from generation to generation, and how Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote down the Mishnah. But so maybe that's what's going on over here, that he's saying that, which is the argument of many Jews over the course of the centuries, that many of the mitzvahs are no longer relevant, they're outdated, they're antiquated, and they don't speak to me. And what Rashi says, and what we know though, is that the miracle of the bread in the Mishkan is that it remained fresh even for a week. And that's the beauty of Torah and mitzvos as well, that even though they were given to the Jewish people 3,300 years ago, but they remain fresh and vibrant and relevant, and ways that we grow even today in the 21st century. Yes, Rivka.
Is that, but I think also it's a concept of homework versus the actual halacha. Is going like to the whole thing is going to be favored. The bottom line is homework is not what we need. We need the halacha. We're going to go above and beyond. Like, and they will have, let's say, sparring every single one. So the thing that because I have that, I don't have to do something else, or the entire statement. Bottom line is the homework doesn't take the place of the actual mitzvah, the actual halacha.
Nice,
That's
nice.
what I was thinking.
Very, very nice. Very, very nice. Okay, very, very good idea. Yeah.
There's also a difference between the laws Hashem gave and all these up that rabbis come up with for their time. That doesn't apply for hundreds of years later or hundreds of years before.
So meaning the laws of Hashem, those are timeless. But let's say the takanot that were issued by the rabbis, that might depend upon the particular circumstance. Okay, very nice. Very nice. Yeah.
Today that somebody said so and your family, tomorrow somebody else would come and even rather than that. So it would cancel before.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we keep it from canceling each other or keeping it in the positive way? It's on a very shaky ground.
Yes, I think I think so. Chana here is wondering in terms of takanot, different decrees or enactments made by the rabbis. You're saying that if we start choosing, right, so then we're on shaky ground, and then it becomes chaotic. Then what do we keep, what do we not keep, and everyone can make up their own decrees. I think the answer to your question is that, well, it happens to be that there are different kinds of decrees from the rabbis. Many of them, they state their reason clearly in the decree. So if it's clear that the reason no longer applies, so then their decree is not going to apply. Like, let's say they said that you should get married on Wednesday. Why? Because Beit Din used to meet on Monday and Thursday, and if there's any issue, hopefully there shouldn't be any issue, but if there's any issue, you can go to the Beit Din on Thursday. But nowadays, we don't have it that the Beit Din meets Monday and Thursday. So there's no reason to get married on Wednesday, because the whole takana was get married on Wednesday because you can go to Beit Din on Thursday. But if there's no Beit Din that especially meets on Thursday and there's Beit Din every day, there's no special reason to get married Wednesday. But then you have other takanot, other decrees, and many decrees where they just made the decree. Then there may be discussion and analysis what the reason is, but they made the decree, and the decree stands whether or not the circumstances change. Now, can you give an example? Well, let's say maybe like medicine on Shabbat. Now, if a person is really sick, then they're allowed to take medicine. If it's a danger to life, then you're allowed to even violate Shabbos entirely. If a person is a chola, if a person is really sick and in bed, so then you're allowed to take medicine. But let's say if a person has a headache, so then you may be aware, maybe not, that there are some restrictions on taking medicine. Why? Because it used to, and they said you can't, because they used to crush it. They used to crush the medicine. Now we don't do that anymore, right? We don't do that anymore. But see, number one, sometimes people do crush their medicine. And we're joking about the pharmacist, right? Is there a reason why the pharmacist is standing up there always? I'm not sure if nowadays the pharmacist stands up there anymore, but it used to be there, right? That there was the upper floor. You had to look up to the pharmacist. So I don't know what he or she's doing in the back, crushing medications. But you're right. We don't really do that. We don't have to do that in taking the medication. We fill out a prescription and we take the pill or whatever it is. But even though the reason might not apply, so still the restriction of taking medication still applies. Another example, let's say blowing shofar on Shabbat or taking the lulav on Shabbat. The reason is because you may, in your excitement to observe the mitzvah, you might come and violate Shabbat by carrying in a place that doesn't have an Eruv. But now we live in a place that has an Eruv. So the reason doesn't apply. Well, you could always leave it in shul, but the concern is that maybe you'll forget to leave it in shul, and you'll carry it you'll carry it, and you'll be in violation of carrying the shofar on Shabbat. So that's why the rabbi said you shouldn't, when it's Rosh Hashanah and it occurs on Shabbat, they said that you don't blow the shofar. But what about if you're in a place that has an Eruv? Not every place, but maybe it should. So that's an example of something where the rabbis made a decree that there's no shofar on Shabbat, whether or not you have an Eruv. Yeah.
What I understand, like people, it's like collection or condition. So at what point do we know that really it's a condition that take effect and it's a law, or it's just a person?
So like well, what's, I mean, how do you know what's a right? Right. Yeah, so the way it works, when rabbis say things, nowadays we don't really have the authority to uproot or override a takana of the past, and also we can't really make takanot today that are on the same level as takanot that are made in the days of the Gemara. I think the answer to both your questions in terms of what's how do you know? I think everything is always building upon previous generations. And so let's say if you have a takana of the Gemara that was accepted, okay, so that's permanent and that's accepted. But let's say you have a rabbi that issues a ruling today, it doesn't mean that everyone accepted that takana. It could be that there's a debate among the rabbis, right, what the takana should be, or so I think that's why, and the way it's important to know the difference between a Torah law and a rabbinic law and a custom. It's important to know the distinction between why we observe things, because the rabbi is really not allowed to add on to the Torah. We're not allowed to add on to the Torah, but we observe Torah laws and those that were issued by the rabbis as well. We observe those laws, but it's important also to know the distinction between the two. And we actually see that in Gan Eden, where what does Chava say? She says to the Nachash that I know that if I touch the fruit, then that's a violation of the sin, and I'm going to be killed. But really, the prohibition was not to eat from the fruit. So Rav Hirsch says, and it's interesting that Rifki and Nacham and Chana, you're intrigued here about it in terms of stringencies and takanot and these kinds of things, and what's a chumrah, what's a takana, that Rav Hirsch points out. He says that this is an example of Baal Tosef, where Adam and Chava added on to the mitzvah. The mitzvah was just not to eat the fruit, and they added onto it. And then when she was pushed into it and touched it by accident or whatever it was, she bumped into it, nothing happened. So it turns out that by making the stringency, that ended up undermining the mitzvah. So Rav Hirsch says it's important when the rabbis enact a takana that you have to, if it's accepted in the Gemara, you have to follow it. You always have to follow it. That's why you have to seek the advice of the Rav and the Shulchan Aruch to see what does it still apply today and in this particular situation. But you should know while you're following it, you should kind of know what's a rabbinic law and what's a Torah law. And also, every single person is in a different place. So the Gemara talks about waiting between meat and milk. So the rabbi says, my father was like wine, and I'm just like vinegar compared to my father. Why? Because my father would wait 24 hours after having meat before having a Twix bar. Doesn't mention Twix, but he says that he would wait 24 hours after having meat before having dairy. And nowadays, what I do, he says, I just wait from meal to meal. And that's where it comes from, the idea of waiting, 6 hours or an extended period of time, the amount of time that usually transpires between meals. So why not say that it's 24 hours? I'm looking at these the mints over here. Why not say that it's 24 hours? Because his father was on the level to wait 24 hours. But he himself was not on that same level. And so you kind of have to know your level and the level of the community before enacting a stringency. And the rabbis decided, according to the commentaries, that 24 hours was too much, but that meal to meal, that was something reasonable to take on. So whenever you take upon yourself a stringency, there's stringencies and there's stringencies. Sometimes it's a stringency that everyone is supposed to observe. Like eating kosher, that's not a stringency. Some people think that that's a stringency to keep kosher. No, it's not a stringency, but some stringencies are chumras that maybe are not necessary, and maybe that end up undermining the observance of the mitzvah. Maybe it's not for the person to keep that stringency. So stringency is the very, very interesting area of halacha and takanot also. But it's important to understand that while we keep the rabbinic laws, it's important to know the distinction. Okay, this is a Torah law and this is a rabbinic law, but we still observe it, but we should know the distinction. Oh, nice.
now put there. So somebody comes down, his father, and another rabbi,
Supposed to be there 3
Believe.
time.
Yeah.
Following their new way of thinking. But with the days, we might be completely the same.
Right.
So.
Right. Typically, the rabbis, when they made a takana, it was because they were concerned that maybe the Torah law would be violated. So let's say you're not allowed to have meat and milk together. And most of the rabbis made a takana, and like you have, let's say, a dangerous electrical pole. So you don't just tell your kids to stay away from it. You put a fence around it. You put a fence around it. So the rabbis also felt it's not enough just to tell people, observe the Torah laws and refrain from any of the averot, but they put a fence. They put a fence around the swimming pool. They put a fence around the electrical pole. And so a lot of times when they make takanot, let's say with meat and milk, so according to the Torah, you can't have meat and milk together. And the rabbis felt that very often people have milk. Very often people have meat and chicken together. A lot of people that have chicken and cheese together, they very well might violate and have meat and cheese together. So they made a takana, they made an improvement, and it made a rabbinic prohibition on having chicken and cheese together. But that's a very insightful point, that a takana is supposed to be an improvement. And you're saying that it could be. How do we know which laws are actually an improvement? Maybe it's actually detracting somehow from the law. That's called emunat chachamim. We have faith in the sages, certainly of the Gemara. And then in terms of the comment, you have you have the Rishonim that debate it, and you have the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah that codified the law in the 1500s. And then you have the rabbinic leaders who kind of understood the halacha, and they understood hopefully the needs of the community, and they kept applying the halacha as it evolved, and as there were new situations, they kept applying it, in a way that was faithful to the tradition and enabled people to grow and keep that tradition. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, Susan. It's a very good question. Very good question. Because we're talking about that he was upset about the stale bread, and that the mitzvah also could become stale. And we spoke about Korach, with Korach saying that if you have a full garment, you still need a string. So Rivki saw that as a possible chumrah.
You said the point of 3,000 years old. Are you saying that he was saying that? Last time you were saying modern people say that.
I was saying that he was saying that. He wasn't saying 3,000. He was saying that that's old. It's from or it was from last year. It was from 2 years ago. We're very different than than the people who received the Torah.
Go back to the Moshe connection with the
Yeah.
There may be something more there. I mean, both of them had some kind of anger. I don't know what the answer is, but there is more probably.
Nice.
And I don't know if you can enlighten that a little bit more, like, what is the connection between the two people? I mean, he obviously brought to Moshe, who, according to the Rashi, he resented because he was the father. But Moshe also is not acting according to any specific command to kill the man. He killed the man, was right or wrong to kill that man. He took it upon himself. It was sort of a vigilante act.
Okay, well, actually, that's an important the postscript of the story. That's what I wanted to get to, is that this is one of the things that Moshe apparently doesn't know, which is strange, because I thought that Hashem gave the whole Torah and all the details to Moshe. So Moshe received the whole Torah at Har Sinai. Why is it that Moshe doesn't know something? So you find this in a number of places. You find it by the people who were defiled for the Karban Pesach, and Moshe doesn't know what to do. And Hashem says, okay, they should bring a Pesach Sheni a month later. You have it by the Makoshesh, the person who's gathering wood in the Midbar, violating Shabbat. Moshe apparently doesn't know exactly how to deal with that. You have it by the Benos Slavchad. That's, I think, did somebody just say you have it by the daughters of Slavchad? Did they gain inheritance in the land of Israel? So you have like four, and this is the fourth case. This is the fourth case where Moshe apparently doesn't know what the halacha is. But so it's not that Moshe does it. Hashem says to Moshe, it continues, the story continues, that you have to remove the blasphemer to the outside the camp, and that he has to be executed. So Hashem tells Moshe that this individual needs to suffer that capital punishment for his crime. Now, even though the Gemara says that we know that the death penalty, that the Torah mentioned the death penalty for certain sins, but at least over the course of history, it was rarely ever implemented by the Beit Din. In this case, Hashem felt it was necessary to make a point that this is a horrible thing what this individual did, and to increase reverence for God, that this individual needed to be executed. So the question is, I thought Moshe received all the laws. How could it be that he doesn't know in these different areas? So it could be that, according to some Mefarshim, that for certain stories, like the Pesach Sheni story and the Beno Slavchad, and here also that it was taught to Moshe through this story. Means that certain things, kind of like Hashem gave the schut, the merit, to the individuals who wanted to observe Pesach, and he gave merit to the doors of Slavchad, that through them the halacha was taught, and he gave kind of a demerit and kind of like that the halacha of the Mekalel and the Mekoshesh were taught through these incidents. But it gets into the very interesting issue in terms of how the traditional understanding is that everything was given to Moshe. Sounds like, according to this, is that there were certain things that Moshe didn't necessarily know 100%, and he needed to interpret it and work at it and analyze it, and maybe sometimes even ask Hashem. And that's the job of rabbis over the course of the generations also, in terms of how do we take this tradition, how do we take this vibrant tradition and make sure it doesn't become stale, and make sure that it's applied in a faithful way to the particular situation. Yeah, David.
Same vein, I'll just tell a story.
Oh, good.
It's in mind studying at Berkeley. Love folk. Yeah, that's a famous crowd. Cousin of mine was studying at Berkeley many years ago, and he loved folk. He was a class in folk, world-renowned folklorists, who had a convention in Israel. This is about 30, 40 years ago. And at the convention, this professor was at the front desk, and he saw an elevator that said Shabbat elevator on it. And he turned out to be a Jew, but he knew everything about everything except Jews. And so he asked at the desk what this elevator is all about, and it said that it goes up and down on Shabbat, so people don't have to push buttons and get involved with electricity and fire and so forth. So he went back to America and would continue as a professor. My cousin made a lot of money, and he sent him an anonymous check for $1 million.
What, really?
To a teacher. Rabbi, this you could tell.
Wow. Wow.
And so.
Why? Why did he send it to him?
He sent it because he appreciated the class.
Wow.
So you can never tell how your students. There's still hope.
There's still hope.
So he sent him the check. The professor is so touched by it, he writes a book called The Shabbat Elevator.
Wow.
And it's with like 60 pages of notes at the end of how the Jewish people remained relevant for 2,000 years because, Lichiyot Bahem, the Lord of Nidlut.
Well, beautiful.
How the Jewish people evolved so we could have our meals, we could cook our meals, we could sit in the light on Shabbat and so forth, and have a Shabbat elevator. So in a modern apartment building that's 60 stories high, you didn't have to walk the stairs. So I thought, so I've enjoyed it.
Very interesting. That's a very, very interesting story, and the kind of like the conversation each year has veered in terms of our capacity, I guess, to maintain the tradition, to keep the tradition, and to keep it current and vibrant. And that's the way of the Masorah, that the Torah was given by Hashem to Bnei Israel, in a way that there's the written Torah and the oral law, and that it's a vibrant living tradition.
Certain things that, of course, have never changed.
Right, even certain things that have never been changed, but we were able to devise like the Shabbat elevator to deal with situations.
You still can't murder, cheat. At least you weren't supposed to.
That relates to, maybe we'll end with the last few minutes about Sfirat Omer. You know, Sfirat Omer is also in this week's Parsha. One interesting thing that we don't do with Sfirat Omer is we don't say the bracha of Shechianu.
Rabbi, before you start that, I had a thought, and I was just wondering, when you were talking about the need for God to talk to Moshe, even though he was supposed to have had all of the laws, but perhaps to emphasize the importance of that particular law, and because there might have been some question about what the punishment should be, that was when God interfered, which is very different from how much Moshe actually knew.
Okay, interesting point. Thank you, Carol. Meaning that it's that this of Moshe checking and God having to tell him kind of highlights the significance of this law.
Yeah.
And the importance of studying it and seeing how it relates to us, but the significance of it. What I was going to, so yeah, excellent point. With Sfirat Omer, usually when we do a mitzvah for the first time, we say the bracha of Shechianu. So the first time you light the menorah, you say Shechianu. The first time you shake lulav, you say Shechianu. And it would have made sense that the first time we count Sfirat Omer, we would say the bracha of Shechianu v'kimanu v'gyanu lazman hazeh. And we don't do that. We don't say the bracha of Shechianu. But one explanation given by the Kajnitzer Magid, he says is that really on the first night of Pesach, God reveals himself to us. And it's like a burst of connection. It's a burst of revelation that takes place the night of Pesach. And then it's lost. And the Kajnitzer Magid says that really the idea of Sfirat Omer over the course of the 49 days is us putting in the effort and the time, the human initiative, to work incrementally back to the level that we were on the first night of Pesach. Because things that are given to us by Hashem are wonderful, it's beautiful, we express gratitude for that, but they're not as long-lasting, they're not as enduring. And it just reminded me of that. It just some of the comments in terms of, in terms of the need for us to be part of the tradition, the need for us to follow the tradition, the idea of the Shabbos elevator. But here with Sfirat Omer, the Kajnitzer Magid says that's why we don't say Shechianu. He says because really we've been there before. On the first night of Pesach, Hashem kind of gave us this revelation. So there's no need to say the bracha of Shechianu because we've already been there the first night of Pesach. When we start counting the second night of Pesach, there it's because we have to put in the effort ourselves. And something, when you put in the effort yourself and you take the initiative, that's something that truly endures and that's longer lasting. And that's what we're doing during the Sfirat Omer. Har Moriah versus Har Sinai. Susan's granddaughter's name is Moriah. Moriah. And some commentaries say that with Har Sinai, Hashem descended on Har Sinai, but now we don't even know where Har Sinai is. And we don't really assume that there's holiness on Har Sinai. And if there is holiness, we don't even know where it is. Different theories. But with Har Moriah, so there, that's the Har Habayit in Yerushalayim. And that is the peak, that's the center of holiness in the whole world. So some of the commentaries, I think it might have been Rav Soloveitchik who said that Har Sinai, it was Hashem descending on the mountain. And Hashem bringing his holiness there. But with Har Moriah, here, it was established, at least the first thing that occurred on Har Moriah was Avram doing Akeret Yitzchak. And this was a tremendous act of human dedication to Hashem. So it was human initiative, it was human effort, it was the human sanctification of the mountain. And Rav Soloveitchik said that that's why with Har Sinai, even though it was amazing, it's the Ma'amad Har Sinai, but once Hashem leaves, the holiness fizzles out. But when we're involved in creating the Kedusha through our effort and human initiative, so then that's something that's long-lasting. That's why Har Moriah has Kedusha that's continuous. this explanation is given as to why you don't have besamim, on Motzei Yantif. We know that on Motzei Shabbos, you use besamim, but on Motzei Yantif, you don't have to use besamim for Havdalah. Why do we take besamim on Saturday night? Because we're losing the neshama yetera, we're losing the extra dimension of soul that we had on Shabbat. So to comfort ourselves that we're losing the neshama yetera, the extra portion of soul, so we take the spices to comfort ourselves. Why not take the spices on Motzei Yantif? So someone to say that you don't have the neshama yetera on Yantif, but is that true? I thought just like we have an additional dimension of soul on Shabbat, so too you have an additional dimension of soul on Yantif. So Rav, I think this is Rav Isaac Bernstein. Rav Isaac Bernstein from England explained. He said that no, that of course Shabbos and Yantif both very, very holy days, and of course Shabbos is Shabbos, but Shabbos, Hashem sanctifies Shabbat. Yes, we are obligated to make Kiddush to enhance the Kiddush, but really God sanctifies Shabbat without our involvement. That's why in the Kiddush and also in Tefillah we say Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbat. However, with Yom Tov, yes, God is involved. God gave us the mitzvah of Yom Tov. God, we're marking times in history, but with Yom Tov, we're the ones who established the calendar. The Beit Din, the Jewish court, is involved in establishing the calendar in terms of what is considered a Yontif and when Yontif falls out. For this reason, that's why the bracha is Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. That God sanctifies Israel, who themselves are the ones who sanctify the holidays. Shabbat is about creation. God created the world. Yom Tov is about redemption, and we're involved also in redemption. Right? We have to take the steps to be involved also. Redemption in the old days, redemption today, we have to be involved. And that's Yantif. So for this reason, Rav Isaac Bernstein said that with Shabbat, God sanctifies Shabbat. With Yantif, it's God together with Bnei Yisrael sanctifying Yom Tov. If that's the case, that's why maybe this is very controversial, just sharing this with you, that with Shabbat, when Shabbat leaves, the Kedusha of Shabbat is lost. Of course, we want to extend the holiness of Shabbat, and it's supposed to affect the whole week. But having said that maybe that's why we need the Besamim after Shabbat, because the Kedusha leaves us after Shabbat. But with Yantif, the reason why you don't need Besamim after Yantif is because the Kedusha remains with us. Because since we were involved in sanctifying the month, and we're involved in the sanctity of Yantif, so the sanctity of Yantif endures even after Yantif concludes. Since the Kedusha stays with us, we don't need the Besamim to comfort us. We don't need the Besamim to comfort us. This is all the idea of that, yes, that things that are given to us by divine fiat and by Hashem are wonderful. But what we truly celebrate as Jews is things that when you're involved in making it happen, that is something that we truly celebrate. God gave us the revelation on the first night of Pesach. V'et Omer is we have to incrementally build up and bring it for ourselves to then merit Matan Torah. Shabbos versus Yantif. Har Sinai versus Har Amoriya. And I think maybe that was one of the themes that came up in terms of our responsibility to be involved in the transmission of the Masorah. Yes, Chana. Very nice. That's why they call it Chol HaMoed. Chol HaMoed. Chol HaMoed. It's the continuation. It's a little less, but that's right. Very good. Very good.
Like, I also like to think about how it connects to science and biology. In this case, when you like riding a bicycle or learning to sing, dendrites are formed in your body, and you have a recollection in your physical work, in your physical body. So when we are part of doing it, and we have to create a calendar, we have to do, in order to make it Kodesh, we have to be part of it. There's a part of us that's involved in it physically, and therefore it still retains in our body, it still retains in our memory, still dendrites and fibers. But in Shabbat, comes from something else. And
Nice.
we have to connect to it, but we can't hold on to it. It's like when you meditate or after you're before, you feel so connected. The next second,
that's interesting, scientific and biological explanation. Beautiful.
So maybe next, maybe.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I was kind of thinking that a little bit in Baruch, that with Yom Ha'atzmaut, that the religious Zionist philosophy is that we're davening to Hashem, we have faith in Hashem, but that Hashem wants us to be partners with Him in moving things along and bringing along redemption to the Jewish people, and of course we were involved and we are involved, and so the Mir Hashem, the kedusha of the state of Israel. And it should endure, and it should grow, and it should thrive, especially since it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the partnership of Tzahal, with the partnership of Am Yisrael, with the partnership of each one of us. Okay, wishing everyone a meaningful day and a celebratory Yom Ha'atzmaut tonight and tomorrow, and Besurot Tovot for everyone. Thank you so much. Ishkoach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Topp.
Yeah, sure, Koa.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I know we had some more discussion today here, and hopefully
Good.
you're okay, even if you didn't hear everything.
It was great.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ayelet. Okay. And Maxine and Abby. Okay. All the best. Carol, David, take care.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank
Be well.
you.
Bye-bye.